Okay, so up until this point, we have been dealing with ionic and molecular compounds. Ionic compounds are composed of what type of atoms or ions? A this and a this is what I'm looking for here. A metal and a nonmetal. When we name ionic compounds, what is the big thing that we worry about? Okay, so we can worry about transition metals. Good, and then the charges. And what do the charges need to equal? 0. Good. Then we have molecular compounds. Molecular compounds are between a what and a what? 2 nonmetals. Good. And with molecular compounds, what do we worry about when we name them? The prefixes which correspond to the subscripts. So I'm just going to write prefixes or prefix. And what is the one exception here with the prefix? Otherwise, it's pretty smooth sailing. That's pretty standard, the ending going to "ide." Danielle?
The first element, if it's just one, you don't use mono, just leave it as it is.
If the first element is only one, you do not use mono. That is the one exception. So now we are going to take ionic and molecular compounds and apply them to acids and bases. Are we familiar with acids and bases? We like the words are familiar. We can come up with some like pH kind of running through your head right now. Okay, good. So an acid is considered a molecular compound. So here you should be thinking charges or prefixes. Okay, good. So this is a molecular compound that contains one or more hydrogen atoms, and it will produce hydrogen ions when it is dissolved in water. In the pure state, meaning when it's not dissolved in water, they will exist as individual molecules. If we do dissolve an acid in water, the chemical bond between the hydrogen atom and the rest of the molecule will break. This will produce hydrogen ions and whatever anion. Ions. Is that redundant? Anion ions? I think it works. It just means negative ions. Anyways, so an example here is our molecular compound, HCl. When we dissolve it in water, it breaks right here between the two elements, and we get a hydrogen cation with a chlorine anion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. A binary acid is an acid that consists of hydrogen and one other element. The other element is usually a halogen. Not always, but usually a halogen. Another type of acid is called an oxoacid, and this is an acid that's going to contain hydrogen, oxygen, and some third element. Usually your third element is going to be a nonmetal. Kind of makes sense since these are molecular compounds, they have nonmetals in them. So when it comes to naming acids, there are 3 rules that you need to look at. The first rule is that when the anion ends in ide, IDE, the acid name will then begin with the prefix hydro. And we'll do examples of these on the next page. The second rule is when the anion ends in the suffix ate, the name of the acid is the root of the anion followed by the suffix -ic. There will be no prefix. And the third rule is when the anion ends in -ite, The name of the acid is the root of the anion followed by the suffix us, O-U-S. So looking at some examples. What is the name of an acid containing chlorine? So we have to put an H out front because it's an acid, and then we bond it to chlorine. Does that make sense? So it'd be hydrogen and chlorine. So when we do that, does this chlorine become chloride, chlorate, or chlorite? Chloride, good. So this would become chloride. How do we know that this is chloride? Studi?
It only has one
What do you mean it only has one?
for the.
Oh, so there's no prefix?
Yeah.
Not quite. So the reason we know that this is just plain chloride is because Cl is found on the periodic table. It just comes right off the periodic table. If it comes off the periodic table, it's ide. So how would we name this acid then? What is the rule if this ends in IDE? Hydro, good. Hydrochloric, or acid.
I thought it was.
Yeah.
I thought
Hy-
8 went to it.
Yeah.
Oh, yep, you're right. Hydrochloride. Something's off on that. Okay, so back to these rules. Not only does it get the prefix hydro, but it also gets the suffix ic. So ide goes to ic. All right, the second one. What is the name of the acid containing sulfate? So sulfate is one of your polyatomics, SO4, 2 minus. So it ends in ATE. What is the rule here? Ic. So sulfuric acid. The ic and then the acid also gets added. Okay, next one we have a nitrite. Nitrite is from your polyatomics again. And ite becomes what ending? OUS, so nitrous. And then you write the word acid. Technically, there'll be H's in front of these. The H's out front are strictly just indicating in the symbolic form that it is an acid.
So why isn't there hydro on,
The hydro, there's no hydro on these two? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Because
Not the I.
it's not the ide. Yep. So only the ide gets the ic, 8, or the ic and the hydro. 8 only gets the ic, and nitrate or ite turns to us, OUS. Okay. All of these suffixes then help indicate to you when you see the word that it is an acid. So then when we write the formulas from the words, you do it exactly the same as ionic compounds. This is because they break apart to form ions when they are dissolved in water. So, to practice, how would we write sulfuric acid? So first of all, your first step here is you need to look at the ending in the acid. Ic indicates
8.
that it was an 8. So sulfate. So you need sulfate anion with the hydrogen cation. So what is our formula for sulfate? SO4 negative 2. Are these balanced? No. So which one needs to be manipulated? The hydrogen ion or the sulfate ion? The hydrogen. What subscript do we need on the hydrogen? 2. So then when we write this as a final answer, do we leave these charges on them? No. Do we bring the subscript with? Yes. So our final answer here is H2SO4. Questions on acids? Okay. The last thing then is bases. Bases are ionic compounds that produce hydroxide ions. What's the formula for hydroxide? OH, good. And what's the charge? -1, good. They are inorganic bases, are named the same way as other ionic compounds. So no new rules here. No new changes to the ides or us's or eights. You just name them like you would a normal ionic compound. So here, how would we name this guy? What's the first element? Sodium hydroxide. Okay, you'd have a better space in between.
It's just one word.
It should be 2. I didn't show that. Faith?
So I read, I was looking up how to do the.
All right, let's practice the next one here. What would we call this one? First element?
Calcium.
Calcium. Second part?
Hydroxide.
Hydroxide.
So the 2 subscript doesn't.
Correct. The 2 subscript does not matter because they're considered ionic compounds. And the last one here. NH4 is ammonium, followed by hydroxide.